welcome to Turn the Page, the official podcast of the Syosset Public Library.
Hello, and welcome to Turn the Page, the official podcast of Syosset Public Library. I'm your host for this chapter, Jenn, and I'm here with the author of a new romance that is just full of good vibes and fun characters and a great romance. Could I please ask you to introduce yourself and your book?
Yes, of course. Well, first of all, thank you so much, Jenn, for having me on. My name is Danielle Jackson, and I am the author of the Accidental Pinup. It's a contemporary romance. That's kind of my lane in the genre, but never say never to trying something else out. Yeah, what else do you want to know? Sorry, I started talking. Yeah,
that's a great starting place. So the first thing I'm interested in a little bit is how you kind of arrived at this book. So I know that you started out as a publicist in publishing. And I'm wondering, how did your time in publishing affect your approach to writing? Did it impact you at all, or?
That is an excellent question, because yes, it definitely did. The funny thing so I worked for Sourcebooks, and I was there when their romance imprint started. And so I was kind of right at the beginning. This was way back in 2008, 2009. So book blogs were kind of a thing still. That was the thing that was pushing book sales up. And I was, right out of college, and they were like, here, figure out romance. And I was like, cool, got it. It's gonna happen. And it both working in publishing and subsequently I worked at a review website, and I now work for an independent bookstore. So I have kind of seen all the sides of publishing and the book business, if you will. And I have to admit that for a while, all of that kind of took the magic of books away from me. I've always been a huge reader, but then I learned how they were made and the intense process, and how so much of it, especially when it comes to publishing, and it's going to sound negative, but it isn't, but so much of publishing is about selling what books will sell, and how to sell more of them. And I think for me, as someone who just thrived in reading, it was an adjustment. I had to kind of reframe how I thought about books and the people writing books and making books, and all the different people from editorial all the way to a bookseller or a librarian or anyone really, how many people touch a book and how that can change so quickly. I remember so many times of having a cover in place, this is the cover, and then it gets to a buyer and they say, nope, that's not going to work for our customer base, you need to change it. And it's just whoa, it's kind of wild. But when it came to sitting down and writing my own book, it really was, it was kind of that. I think Toni Morrison at one point said, I'm not going to know the quote exactly word for word, but she said, if you can't find the books you want to write, you have to write them, or some form of that. And I know many different creators and authors have said some kind of version of that statement. And I wanted to read a book about a plus size woman who was confident from the start, but still had to go on a journey, and the people in her life who love her unconditionally, and the person she falls in love with. So that's kind of where it started.
That's awesome. And that leads me into what I wanted to talk about next, which is Cassie, because she's great. I love her so much as a main character. She's, as you said, she's so confident, but she does question herself on occasion. She experiences some doubt, and she's really successful, but she's struggled to get there, for a number of reasons. And she's just a total babe, and her curves drive men crazy, and it's really awesome. So could you talk a little bit about her and kind of how you arrived at your main character?
Yeah, so Cassie is the person or a character, she's the person who I think has always kind of existed in the back of my mind as just like this 100%, like she's 100% confident. And so she has like lived in my mind in some version for a very long time. But I also knew I needed to figure out the right like situation that was going to really make her tick, because, you know, she is a self-described fat Black small business owner, and that those are like three major things that are stacked up against her, really. But she has been successful. She's worked really hard. She has a support network that's really important to her, and she wants to, you know, lift them up as much as they lift her up. And so I was like, okay, well, I've got this like overconfident, beautiful, plus size woman who celebrates her curves, who celebrates other people's all types of bodies. You know, that is her job as a boudoir and pinup photographer. But I was like, what would make her tick? And I was like, oh, her being in front of the camera. And then it was just like, well, how far can I push this? Oh, I'm going to put her in lingerie. And that's going to be the whole that. And from there, it just like steamrolled through. It was like, it all kind of just fell into place, I guess. But yeah, she is just kind of, she's like, I think she's like one of those, you know, how you say, like, people will talk about like a woman that, you know, women want to be and that men fall in love with. And that's very like binary. And I don't always think in that way, but I wanted her to be this very appealing character to a variety of readers and people. And yeah. And so I just I really like infused her, I hope, with that confidence.
Yeah, absolutely. And I'm really glad that you talked about, you know, how she wants to lift up everybody around her too, because I think that really plays into like the sort of like the quandary she finds herself in when she's asked to model for this campaign, because she's like, you know, as a boudoir photographer, like she's used to like not just making people look sexy, but feel sexy.
Yeah.
And, you know, when she gets in front of the camera, now she kind of has to like let other people do that for her too. You know, it's really interesting.
Yeah, that was really interesting too, because I knew I wanted to explore that specifically with her because she is so good at her job. And like, that is like the big feedback that people give to her, is that, you know, she makes them feel so at ease. And it was just so easy, even though that person was nervous about doing this type of a photo shoot. And so for Cassie, you know, she can dole it out, but it's like, but can she like take it as well? And so it was an interesting like balance, because it was like Reed, who is the love interest, Reed has to get a job done as well too. Like even though she is the model, even though she wants to be the photographer, and he comes in and is the photographer. And so he has to do that. But then at the same time, he's grappling with like, oh, actually, I kind of like her. And so it's like, how far can they push it? How comfortable can they get? Because I think even in any type of photographer model situation, there is a level of trust that you kind of just have to have from the start, whether you know that person or you don't. And so I think it was like kind of those things. I was like, I don't want this to be like weird or like overstepping too much of a boundary, but I also wanted to play with the attraction that was there. And then of course, her being in very beautiful, sexy lingerie was just kind of that added to that tension.
Absolutely. And Cassie like had a lot to overcome in order to trust him, you know, because he was like her main rival in the business, you know, like he kept getting jobs that she had really wanted. And so like, it's a fun situation, you know, like what drew you to the sort of like, you know, like rivals to lovers story?
Yeah. So personally, I really love to read enemies to lovers, but I don't know. I just, every time I've attempted to really make like an enemies to lovers storyline, it's like, it doesn't quite work. Like I don't push my characters far enough. So, I mean, like they are rivals, but they also like each other pretty quick, which is like, I guess my cup of tea in romance. Like I like things to get moving pretty quickly. But yeah, you know, I thought that was like another level of, like I said, tension just a minute ago. And I think it was another layer maybe to the tension that was between them, because she knew very well who he was because, they would be up for the same jobs around the city of Chicago, and he would ultimately get picked. And a lot of that had to do with the fact that he had kind of a longer track record as a photographer in kind of the more like high profile ad campaigns, because he was a white man, and he kind of walked in and said, I'd like to do this job, and he got to do this job. Meanwhile, as a Black woman, Cassie really had to kind of prove herself like time and time again to get these jobs. And so he really kind of embodied that struggle to one extent, but then also she kind of overcomes it by like trusting him more. And getting to know him, I think that was a big thing, because, she just thought he was kind of this nonchalant guy who just got what he wanted, and, his photos were fine, but were they really that interesting, and but she learns that there's more to him. And I thought that was an important part to their story as well.
Oh yeah, for sure. Like, I thought it was very interesting, like from that one angle that you just discussed, like, she has struggled to reach where she is in her career in a way that he really never had to. But there are like other interesting contrasts, like in the relationship, because like, for instance, he has had like a really troubled childhood and like a really difficult kind of family dynamic, whereas like Cassie has sort of like been surrounded by like supportive people,
Yes.
like, who sometimes question her decisions, but who are generally supportive, and I think that affects the relationship dynamic in an interesting way too.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Oh yeah. 100%. I definitely wanted her to be the one with the stable family. I didn't want her to kind of have the tragic backstory. And that's probably the most personal part of this book. Like, that's the biggest piece, because that is how like I grew up. Like, my parents have like 100% supported me in like all of the random decisions, and they definitely said to me, like, you are not going to make a ton of money working in publishing. And I was like, I know, but I love books so much, and so they were like, okay, that is what you're doing. We are going to support you, and offer advice and support both financially, but also emotionally and things like that too. So that parent relationship was probably a lot of people try to figure out, what's like from the author's life, and that is probably the biggest parallel right there. But yeah, and then I thought it was an interesting idea, and I know people like this from different various places in my life where they have really struggled, but they have overcome them, and they've had difficult family situations, but they've overcome them and thrived. And part of that way for them to thrive was to kind of cut out the toxic, even familial relationships that they've had, which is something that Reed does. But then his subplot is with his younger brother coming back into the picture, and like what that means when he opens himself to new types of connections.
Yeah, I love that, and I would like to talk about Russ and the supporting characters in a sec, but before we get there, I want to touch on this idea that like there is no tragic backstory for Cassie, because I think that's super important, like it's a story that's about like joy and like a Black woman's joy, and doesn't have to be that like that misery porn, I guess you might call it, And it reminded me of another thing, that like there's also no fat shaming in this book, like it's a book about body positivity, but there's no naysayers in the, in the advertising company. It's just like, and that with being able to avoid that misery just like lets you open up to so many different kinds of storytelling and experiences,
Yeah, that was very much on purpose. Existing in the world as a Black woman, there is so much that is kind of already just like a struggle, like just kind of being here. And so I knew that was enough for this character to go through, just she kind of, I think, goes into the situation expecting setbacks. And so when she does have some, even in kind of the way it's like, oh, instead of being the photographer, you're going to be the model, she's like, oh, but I wanted total creative control, and now she feels like she only has part of it, and so there is some of that. But yeah, I really wanted Cassie to kind of have this very joyful family, and then, and very much with her friends too. It's like a found family. They're all very close. Yeah, so I think, yeah, like I said, and then especially with the just the whole body positivity, body acceptance, even body neutrality, there are very varying sides of that whole conversation. But yeah, I wanted her, the closest I think I got to it is right at the beginning when they bring in a model and she's, straight sized, if you will, or she's slim, she's a model, she's slim. And immediately Cassie's like, well, this is not the vision. And and they're like, well, this is just like a test shoot. Like, this is who we brought in. But, she calls her friend who's like kind of running the lingerie line. And she's like, I got this, we'll figure this out. But of course that turns into, oh, you're going to be the model, Cassie, because you're perfect for this. So yeah, it would, that all of that was done on purpose. I didn't want it to be kind of that kind of a story, like these are obviously things that people deal with and grapple with, and in their own ways they grapple with them throughout the story, but it's not like an external conflict for that's more internal, like it's just things they're already feeling.
Yeah. Oh, for sure. Absolutely. That makes sense. Yeah, it's interesting because I think that the book, like in some way, portrays like changes that we are kind of finally starting to see in advertising and in fashion photography, because like it's far too little far too late, but when I go onto Facebook now, like I do see like lingerie and clothes in sizes that look more like they would fit me, or you see a variety of like body types. And I think that companies are kind of finally catching on that like this will be a good thing for you rather than a bad thing, because like you will attract a broader range of people.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, I completely agree. I will say I did like in my mind create this lingerie line, and I was like, okay, it's got to fit a variety of sizes, it's got to appeal to different skin tones and and things like that. So but some of my favorites, like and a lot of it has to do with the advertising, but I really love Rihanna's lingerie line, Savage X Fenty. And there's a company that's based in the UK, but they have like US shipping capabilities, and they're called Playful Promises, and they do a lot of like lines with fashion influencers, which is kind of where that started with her friend who starts the lingerie line. So those are the two I like to point to because they're fun, they're they're sexy, they're bright colors, they're different patterns, and they really do fit a variety of sizes, which is the best.
Yeah. That's super exciting. And to finally see like clothes that fits people, that's not just like, a shapeless bag, like
Exactly. Right.
I like loved picturing all of the different designs of the lingerie and the clothes. Like it was super fun to experience like a visual medium, like through writing, like
Cool. Yeah.
and when you were designing
Mm-hmm.
designing the clothes, like did you sketch anything out, or did you like visualize it, or like what was your process of like designing a clothesline?
Yeah, no, that's really interesting. I mean, a lot of it was like looking at like honestly just going to like there's this like undergarment website called Bare Necessities, and it literally was just like going to their new arrivals page and just like scrolling through it and seeing what it all looked like. I have no background in fashion whatsoever, but I do like to look at clothes, and and as someone who has needed a very supportive bra for most of her adult life, you get kind of sick of wearing just like black and beige and white bras, really, and I was like, I want to do something fun. And so you do have to find, you have to spend extra money to get like the fun stuff in your size. So I was like, okay, this is like, it is fiction, it is a fantasy. So I was like, we're just going balls to the wall here. But yeah, I didn't really sketch too much out, but some of it was just like very funny. Like I think like a bra that has like caution tape straps, like that's great, right?
I was like, oh, I would buy that. Like I would.
So I was like, I know I need to like go on Etsy and like find someone to like custom make me one or something, because that would just be too funny.
Let's talk a little bit about the supporting cast, because you had mentioned Russ before, who's Reed's brother, and like all of the other supporting characters are so great, like Cassie's coworkers, Reed's friend James, right?
Yeah, right.
Yeah. they're just like, and some of my favorite moments of the book are just like these kind of like hangout scenes, where like they aren't necessarily advancing the plot in that
Yeah.
moment, but like you are getting a feel for the characters and their dynamics and just like kind of basking in good vibes.
Yeah, I mean, I love a good, just like you're just out with people and you're talking and there is no like hard end time, like you're just out and being cool and hanging out. And I'm really pleased to hear that you've got the vibe of of those scenes, because that's really what they were. They really were to kind of show everyone's personalities. I will say, like, the friend group, they all work at the same, at Cassie's boudoir photography studio, and a lot of them, not like carbon copies or anything, but a lot of the interactions are really closely based on like conversations I've had with people. And I'm really excited for my friends to read this book to see like if they get it. And if they like remember how I remember things, so that'll be fun to see. But I really wanted Cassie. I mean, I have really good, like close friends who I met where I worked and like from my first job. And we've been friends for over a decade. And we just, I think it's different. Like I still have friends from when I was a kid. And that's Cassie and her friend Dana. They've known each other since middle school. And I have those friends, but I think like when you work with someone and you have kind of different facets to your relationship, it changes. And I think making friends as an adult, I mean, so many people know this, it's really hard. A lot of times work is the only place you meet new people. So it's just, I really wanted to kind of showcase like a fun and interesting workplace, but with kind of the similar, like, oh, here's like my work wife or whatever, or my work husband or whatever you want to call it. And how they all complement each other all together.
Yeah, there is like I don't know if I'm going to describe this well, but there's like a cohesiveness to sort of like all of the different spheres of Cassie's life, because like her work friends meet her like friends from outside of work, and like, Reed's friends kind of become her friends, and like they have mutual friends because like James runs a restaurant and so does Dana's wife, so like there's like it has this like real lived in feel of like, even though Chicago's a big city, I'm sure that there are parts of Chicago where it has like a neighborhoody feel and everybody kind of knows everybody. And
that's exactly it. Like River North is a real neighborhood in Chicago, and it is kind of where my home base for the series. I know like real Chicagoans are going to be like, that is not where that store is, or where these boundaries of the neighborhood are. And I was like, I know it's fiction. I played around with it a bit, but yeah, I really, in Chicago, especially, like the neighborhoods kind of do get that small, almost small town feel, because you see the same people, even if you don't even talk, like you see the same person because you're walking to work at the same time or something like that. And I really, there is kind of like a synergy between how Cassie and Reed have been adjacent to each other for a few years. And so it was like inevitable that these two were going to meet somehow.
yeah. It was just like, it was so much fun, and it was just like a really fun group of people to hang out with, and like nice to read a book where, there's not really like a villain, like everybody kind of basically gets along. Like even like there are antagonists, right? Like there are people who have goals that are at odds with Cassie's goals, but like even they kind of all get along too. Like it's just about differences of viewpoint, not about like, hostility or animosity. Like
I am definitely, like I said, like enemies to lovers, like I love to read it, but it's not like my creative lane. So even like that was a really good way of putting it. Like their goals are kind of in conflict with Cassie's goals. I think that's like an excellent way of putting it. I'm like going to write that down because that's really lovely.
Oh, thanks. So have you done any like dream casting for this book? Like, do you have ideas of who you'd like to play like Cassie and Reed?
A little bit. Yeah. So it's funny because actually the side characters for this first book like are really clearly people in my brain, but Cassie and Reed are both kind of mashups of various people. But Cassie there's a model, her name is Tabria Majors, and I believe, don't quote me, but I believe she won like maybe almost a decade ago. There was like an amateur like Sports Illustrated model search, and she won, and she was like the first plus size model to do it. Like I think they had been doing it for a couple of years or something, and so she won, and I believe she got like a special like online only, but it was like she got her own cover of that. And she's a model, she does catalog stuff. She was like in the latest Ivy Park campaign, Beyonce's sport line with Adidas. Yeah, she's great. So she's kind of a little bit of Cassie. And then there's actually this French pinup model, her name, and she's still, that sounds like she's from like way in the past, but she's like a current French pinup model, and her name is Jenny Ria, and her last name is spelled Rieu. And she does a lot of kind of like really cute, kitschy pinup looks, but she also models lingerie as well. And so, yeah, Cassie is kind of like an amalgamation of the two of them, with the style of Andra Day, who is, the R&B singer who played Billie Holiday in The People versus Billie Holiday. Yeah, like her style. Yeah. And all three of them are great Instagram follows. They take the best pictures and videos and stuff. So it's really fun. And then as for Reed is kind of based off of, there's this Hallmark movie actor named, oh gosh, I just blanked on his name, and I know I have it written down somewhere. I'm going to find it so I can tell everyone. His name is Tyler Hines. And yeah, he's been in a bunch of like Hallmark movies. He was on like a couple of the later seasons of Letterkenny, which was on Hulu.
Yes.
Yeah. And so it's like him, but then also a little bit of Chris Evans, which I think in Romancelandia, almost every romance hero these days is a little bit Chris Evans. Yeah. So those are the two for them. Yeah. Those were the two main characters, I think.
Nice. That's awesome. When I was reading for Sam, I was just getting like, Aubrey Plaza vibes a lot.
Yeah. Yeah, definitely her like deadpan delivery. But I will say she is very specifically, there's this British R&B singer named Georgia Smith, and she spells her first name Jorja. And she's absolutely gorgeous, but she always looks like she's slightly bored. And that I was like, I don't even know how I came across her, but I was just like, that's it. That is her. Yep, there's Sam. So yeah. And that is how Sam is. Sam is always like, I think, slightly bored with everyone. So
yeah, like she cares, but she's just like, yeah, I'm slightly better than all this, but also I really care about you all.
Totally. Yep.
So can I ask, like, is there anything else in store for these characters? Do you think you'll ever return to them, or?
Yeah, so book 2 is coming. I don't have an exact pub date. It should be next summer sometime. I don't know when. They haven't told me. I'm at the whim of Berkeley, so they'll let me know. But yeah, so book 2, speaking of Sam, is going to be Sam and Russ, which I think I kind of lined up there throughout kind of the second half of the book. So of this first book, I should say. So yeah, so their book will be out next in 2023, hopefully summer, but you never know. Publishing is always changing.
I can't wait to read that, because like Sam and Russ are such an interesting combination, like they have very different vibes, but I could also see it like really working out. So.
I mean, they are like extreme grumpy sunshine. Like she is very grumpy and he is very sunshiny. And it has, I have written the book, it is finished. I have sent it to my editor. So, but yeah, it was a lot of fun, and they both have a lot of feelings. So more so than is let on in the first book, I think. So yeah.
That's great. Well, I hope that you'll, consider coming back to talk to us again when the second book comes out.
This was great, Jen. I loved it.
Thank you. Oh my gosh, I loved it too. Thank you so much for, making the time to talk to us today. I really appreciate it.
No problem at all. This was wonderful. Thank you.
Welcome. Okay, listeners, you can check out the Accidental Pinup at your favorite library or independent bookstore. This has been Jen in conversation with Danielle Jackson, and it is time to close this chapter.
It's time to close this chapter of Turn the Page. Join us for the next episode.